And welcome back, everyone, to Brain Swap.
Hey.
Glad you all could make it.
Hey.
Yeah, where today we're going to be talking about shonen. Shonen anime and manga, but anime particularly. Chat room's already live and kicking.
Jumping.
Thank you all very much for joining us there. So we're going to talk about why shonen is so popular. And we should probably start
Shonen me the money.
by defining shonen.
What is it?
What is shonen? So shonen is a
restaurant, right? Shoney's?
no, different thing. So shonen is a kind of a genre demographic or demographic genre. It refers technically to anime aimed at like roughly say 9 to 13-year-old boys. So it's, you know, stuff for tween boys, roughly speaking. Maybe a little older than that. We might go up to 14 or 15 on that. But it's also come to be a specific kind of stylistic genre as well. Shonen anime is typified by shows like, well, what would you define as some shonen anime, some classic shonen anime?
Classic?
Yeah.
Naruto
is certainly
well,
one.
The earlier stuff, I mean.
Yeah.
The later stuff was a little bit more mature, but.
Well, no, that still counts. Dragon Ball Z.
Dragon Ball Z.
Definitely shonen. What else would there be? I mean, One Piece.
One Piece, yes.
Shonen?
One Piece I'd consider shonen.
Yeah. Rurouni Kenshin, Yu Yu Hakusho, Attack on Titan.
Attack on Titan is... although it does have some more violence.
It sure does.
Yeah.
Sure does. But it's certainly aimed at that,
you know, the audience
young
that they're shooting for.
Yep.
So, a lot of anime.
Attack on Titan would be, you know, older end of shonen. Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, definitely. But that, so now shonen's range is kind of a loose, but generally young, like teen.
I usually say tween and young teen.
Tween and young teen. Yeah.
You know, so maybe 10 to 14, depending on how you count it. And again, like we say, that it doesn't have a very clear, specific definition. Depends on who you ask.
But that's pretty much my mindset.
Yeah. Some days. So, but there's also kind of that genre.
How about Gundam?
Thing. So Gundam is shonen. Yeah. Again, aiming at the older end of that spectrum. But you know, the Attack on Titan is definitely shonen. But there's also that kind of that general stylistic thing of shonen. So when we talk about shonen like Naruto or One Piece or Dragon Ball Z, they tend to have certain aspects in common.
Now, what is that? The art, not the art, but
not just the art style. No,
the writing or the characters.
Well, the characters are part of it. There's usually a team, right?
Yeah.
There's a group of folks. Again, think the folks in Naruto or Bleach or One Piece or Dragon Ball Z. It's usually set in some kind of fantastical world.
Eureka 7.
Yeah, exactly. So there's usually, it's either a fantasy world or science fiction world, or at least the real world with some fantasy aspect to it. So Yu Yu Hakusho has, you know, the spirit world that the characters fight in, even though it's technically, you know, the real world. But there's always that in Rurouni Kenshin is a good example of where it is set in the Meiji era, but it's a kind of a jigsaw puzzle reworked version of the Meiji era.
Somebody mentioned my wasabi.
Ah, yes. We're enjoying some wasabi here.
Elfen Lied.
Yeah, Elfen Lied's not shonen.
I was going to say that's a little mature, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely seinen. Although it's a good example of a series where if you removed the nudity and the violence and such, it would fit more closely the shonen formula.
So the shonen formula includes not just teams and groups, but also content appropriately targeted.
Right, exactly. So you're not going to have freezing or Queen's Blade or things like that as technically shonen. Yeah. But that said, there are other elements as well. There's almost always fighting.
Gotta have it.
Yeah.
Action,
combat, personal combat, and also more importantly, there's usually a personal element to the combat. So shonen is often about the characters improving themselves as fighters. And think Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, One Piece, the characters are all kind of leveling up as they go through the story.
I may not be perfect now, but I'm growing and I'm going to get better.
Right. There is a really interesting article about this in, I think, Anime and Philosophy, which delved into the question of kind of the ethics of that question of trying to become better at fighting, and this idea that you are trying to that some people fight to be better than somebody else, while others fight to be better than themselves, to improve, and the kind of psychological health of those two things, plus the general question of, is it a good thing in general to be just trying to get better at physical combat? Like, self-improvement is one thing, but when you're like, I want to be the best person ever at this, is that healthy? And it's an interesting question. And the goal of the article was not to answer that. It was to explore that, you know, there are unhealthy sides of all of these different perspectives.
If I was going to be the best murderer.
Right, exactly.
It's good to be the best, but it's not good to murder.
Yeah. And you know, you may not have the capacity, you know, the physical capacity to be the best kendo person of all time. And so are you setting yourself up for failure, in other words? Just an interesting thing to think about.
But is it the journey or the destination?
Right, exactly. And Dragon Ball Z is actually a good example of this, because you know, Vegeta is always trying to beat Goku. You know, that's his goal, while Goku was always just trying to improve himself. And you see the differences there. And obviously Vegeta is constantly ticked off at himself, but that maybe more personality. But then also Goku, it's like, okay, so you're better. You know,
now what?
Outside of, yeah, well, exactly. You know, outside of saving the world, which obviously is important, but just, you know, constantly trying to improve your skills can be kind of empty.
True. What 13-year-old boy doesn't like nudity? Yes.
Well, this is true.
And violence.
Well, some. I mean, it takes some time for that to kind of kick in.
Yeah.
It certainly depends. But yeah, it's a fantasy violence, definitely a thing there. And Fist of the North Star, yes, that's definitely shonen. Again, some of the stories are a bit on the more adult side.
Well, now shonen just for boys.
Yeah,
for the most part, boys is their main focus.
Yeah.
So things that are more of interest. So fighting naturally is something boys kind of engage in, less of the social interaction as much as like action.
And you know, to that point, we should point out girls watch shonen. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, then there's no hard and fast rules. There's just a generalization.
And it's more about the fact that, you know, historically this is a genre that has been aimed at boys.
When did this genre become more of a conceptual thing? That, hey, this is specifically a shonen.
Good question. Folks are pointing out Fist of the North Star is possibly, arguably, the first. Dragon Ball Z is certainly the one that popularized the formula, if you will. You know, the idea of a team of people fighting through a fantasy world. Fist of the North Star was certainly huge and popular, but it was more a forerunner of the formula. Dragon Ball Z was so popular, everyone was like, okay, we're all going to copy that, right? There's always that one kind of tipping point show. Yep. And it still works. Yeah.
Imitation, the greatest form of flattery.
And Dragon Ball Z is sure flattered at this point. So yeah, I would say certainly, you know, the late 80s, early 90s of Dragon Ball Z was when it really coalesced as a thing. People are like, that's a thing now. So our question is, why is that so popular? Why do people come back to that so much? And you know, it certainly seems to be a very kind of a leading indicator, if you will, of anime. So many people get into anime through shonen, through Naruto, or through One Piece, through Dragon Ball Z back in the day, and even today, as they say in Funimation, there are new 9-year-olds coming along all the time, you know, and they find Dragon Ball Z, and this is the greatest show ever. So, what is it about these themes that really get to people? You mentioned earlier, you know, physical combat is something that boys certainly traditionally get really excited about.
I think the ability to identify with somebody in a situation. And as a team, as a kid growing up, you're forced into teams whether you like them or not. And sometimes they're of your choosing, sometimes they're not. And what do you do? How do you deal with that? And what do you do to survive? And so you can identify with the characters and say, I've encountered somebody who has so much more power than me, and I've got to beat them somehow. And what can I do to do that? And I may not always win, but I'm going to see what I can do. Yeah, I can relate to that.
I think you're absolutely right. And think about that age group and what they're going through right there. They're going into middle school.
Whoa, middle school.
Talk about, fighting masses of opponents who want to beat you to a pulp. That's middle school right there.
Some kids can just be so cruel.
Yeah. Now, Desert Fox suggests that shonen is easy to get into for people who are not super into anime.
Oh, yeah,
Now, why would that be? That's an interesting topic. I think you may be right, but let's dive into that. What is it about it that makes it appealing to folks who aren't into anime?
Does it lean on the heavy anime themes, or does it stay more?
That's a good point. Not really.
Not as deep.
You don't have the harem tropes as much as you do in other shows. You have.
It doesn't always reference other anime. So
good point.
That makes it a lot easier for someone new to anime to jump into.
That's a very good
action,
point.
Anybody can walk. A good choreographed fight scene. Just the action of it.
Yep.
Anime, live action, you name it. It's an engaging thing.
Yeah.
So
absolutely right. Yeah, I think that's very true.
What else could there be that has that level of draw?
You're right, no Kodasai. Middle school is usually way worse than high school.
Yes.
Although high school is usually not great either for a lot of people, but still, middle school tends to be the
kids find out what they shouldn't do just to get along. Oh, I'm sorry, I hurt everybody's feelings, and now I'm ostracized. Okay, maybe I won't do that next time.
Yeah. And which gets back to that point. You have kids, who are now dealing with completely new social circles and having to deal with being thrust into groups. And often middle school is much more, the social dynamics are very different.
I was a big fish in the pond before, and now I'm a little fish in a big pond. Oh, no.
Yeah. And in primary school, it's more loosey goosey about the things you do and gym and so forth. And suddenly in middle school, things are much more structured. Suddenly you're on that team for the entire year or whatever. So yeah, it's really tough. But yeah, it's pretty complicated. So yeah, I think that's a great point. That as someone outside of anime, you get these things. I think another thing that helps is that shonen titles are almost always self-contained. In the sense that you watch Naruto and it's Naruto. You watch the latest Tenchi TV series, and you probably should go back and see what's going on there. There's more that sense,
in that sense,
right? You're going to get that story, and it's going to be told over the course of however many hundreds of episodes.
So you could jump in easier to something like that.
Yeah,
and the references back to previous stuff.
I also suspect to that point, we're so used to TV shows that go on for season after season after season. I think seeing an anime series that does the same thing also feels a little bit more familiar to us Western viewers. That we see something that's on episode 50, 100, 200. It's like, well, that's like Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not in that sense.
Like Seinfeld, though, but Seinfeld did have a great run, and some series barely make it through a season. Some don't even make it through a season.
Yeah.
So, but seeing something like that means that, you could pick it up. You could get a little bit here and there, and once you develop a feel for the characters, like I remember that character. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Now, Nokudasai asks if we've talked about how shonen has much more exposure to non-anime fans. Well, that's kind of the question. Why? Why does it have so much more exposure? There's plenty of other anime out there. Think Ghost in the Shell. Think Cowboy Bebop. That certainly folks have heard about and know about. Akira. But for some reason, these are the ones that are kind of winning the genetic dispersal war of meme
One Piece,
thing.
Naruto, Bleach. One Piece, Naruto, Bleach. One Piece.
Although
they
now
do get
it's,
play.
you know,
they do get play.
Naruto, One Piece, Naruto, One Piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. For, you know, for some reason, people really talk about this, and these are the ones. These are the memes that are spreading. Why is the question? I think we're hitting on some of those topics.
I suppose over the air broadcast make it something that parents are going to feel more comfortable with letting their kid watch something on Cartoon Network than they are just random place on the internet. So in a sense, there's a little bit of vetting that goes on.
And also, it's easier to sell a long-running TV series on a show, something like Cartoon Network, and it's something that's 13 episodes.
Yeah,
it's like, what are we going to do with that?
We're going to have to find something in a few months.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot easier to sell something that's longer. So I think that's absolutely true. Liquidus points out, or if he says he thinks he heard, that shonen tends to be more popular thanks to their worlds being more fantasy or original based. So foreigners don't need to be aware of Japanese culture as much to get it. That's one way of looking at that. I think, I don't know. I think that is, I don't think that's as true of shonen as it is of a lot of other things. I mean, there are plenty of shorter seinen or shoujo series that don't really go into Japanese culture. And when I think of Dragon Ball Z, there's lots of little sort of Japanese style things in there in terms of food and things along those lines. Naruto certainly has ramen all the time. So yeah, exactly. But I think, in other words, I think it's not very pronounced, but I think it is there. I think there is less.
It doesn't feel like the Japanese cultural emphasis that they're trying to, hey, come and visit the country, is we're putting this into every anime. It's more of a, okay, well, it's there, but it's not like as much of a push.
Yeah, exactly. No, Kudasai suggests part of the draw is that it's somewhat foreign. I think that's an interesting way of putting it, that there is enough difference from Western culture. It's fantasy, but there's a bit of that Japanese twist to it, without it having constant references to udon or what have you. And I think that's a good point.
What about mood?
Yeah.
Do you have to be in any particular mood to enjoy it? Like with a romantic comedy, you kind of got to have a specific feel, or a mystery or horror. You kind of got to be in that mood to really enjoy it. What do you think about the mood for shonen?
I don't know. I think I have to be in a certain mood for shonen. Because sometimes that shonen's in its own intense arc. And sometimes I'm not in the mood for people wailing on each other with fists, or what have you.
The fight of the of the day.
Right. And I like sometimes I just, the action's kind of exhausting. Trying to follow what's exactly going on. So I think it depends on the person.
I kind of felt like I could just sit down and pick it up, but at some point when it goes from story to fight scene, depending upon how they make that transition, I feel like, I could watch this, or a part of it for me is the story that goes into it. Fight scenes are great, but it means even more when I have something that backs it. So what's the thing leading up to the effort behind this, and is it going to follow through? And
yeah, you're right, D. I'm also not the average consumer. That's very true.
That's true.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the issues I have, is I can't keep track of the plot often. We're on episode 248. I'm like, who's that guy again? He's come back. Oh,
that guy.
Go into Wikipedia. But I think that's also part of the fun too. You have such a huge cast of characters to play with.
Wow, with a longer series, I could lose track of somebody, and with a shorter series, there's not as much time unless they bombard you with characters.
Yeah. This is actually one of the theories of why geeks like science fiction and fantasy so much, especially these long-running series, because geeks like to remember all those little details, and they like to not so much be surprised, but also be able to say, oh, I know who they're talking about. Oh, I know who that is that's coming up, because I have this massive database in my head of every single character.
Flex my memory muscles.
Yeah. So I think that is also some of the appeal too, is that sense of mastery, that sense of understanding the show at in a very strong level. You talk to any Doctor Who fan, and they will talk your ear off about all the companions and all this kind of stuff, because it's fun to remember it.
Which doctor was played by what character at what point, and how long was that, and who is his companion, and he lasted until which director.
And to be fair, there's a British comedian named John Sessions, and he can do this thing where you can name any composer or classical artist, and he will immediately respond with the date of their birth. It's just up there for some reason. That's one of those things that he just, and often their date of their death, and just all sorts of these random. This is one of those things he's a fan of, if you will. He's passionate, and so it's just locked up in there. So anything can trigger these things. Salieri, August 38th, August 13th, 1791 or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh. It happens. Now, Master Chief Snake is bringing up the very important point, which is the pedigree of the shows and who publishes the original manga of these things. And this is actually really fundamental.
Getting to the source.
Yeah.
Trace it to the manga.
The reality is that the shonen titles are backed by major media companies who have seen the success of Dragon Ball Z and Fist of the North Star and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and these things, and they recognize the money to be made. So they're more than happy to advertise and make toys and do all sorts of stuff to push these shows and make them more popular. So there's definitely that corporate side of it too. They get more advertising dollars because there's huge publishing behemoths behind them. So it's certainly something worth noting. But it's an interesting thing. And William Aguilar points out that in America we're used to our cartoons going on for years and years and years and years. So it's a little more familiar seeing that. That is kind of the thing. And it's a little more similar to that point. When you think shonen, shoujo, seinen, shonen is much more similar to American cartoons in terms of content.
Yeah, it does have that feel to it, and the whole marketing merchandise with it.
Yeah.
For the longer series, it makes a lot of sense. For the shorter series, if they can get up the momentum to the point where the toys are out there and people learn about it from the toys, and then they get into the show, or versa versa, then it works. But if only one of those markets has penetration, then it doesn't just lift off the way it would.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why these shows can do better over here, because those companies can bring over the manga and the toys and all those other things, where it's harder for a smaller show to get that media mix going, to kind of support each of those things and dealing with all that. I saw something in there that I wanted to note on. But yeah, I think it's definitely important.
There's a few good American cartoons. There's just not as much cartoon in the U.S. as...
Like what is that? Thank you. That was something I was going to point out earlier. That when you think of that description of a team of people all fighting in a quasi fantasy world, doesn't that kind of sound like the Avengers? Shonen is very similar to superhero in those respects.
It's amazing that we hadn't seen more animated, U.S. animated movies or TV series. We had Super Friends on in the morning, but that was kind of like a mix. But the way that anime took off from the publications from the manga, Marvel and DC had been around for years. Comic books are in the form of a storyboard. Just translating that into a story is just a few steps to make that leap. And now we have enough special effects where you can make a great movie. But I'm wondering why the U.S. didn't really jump on the same way the Japanese did, where they could take something that was in print, turn it into a series, get that vehicle going. Well, especially with that age group and demographic.
I think we certainly had those, but it didn't start with print. You think G.I. Joe, you think Transformers. They usually started with toys. So we had the toy lines. He-Man was the first to do this. They designed the toys and then hired scriptwriters to write an animated series around those toys. And the idea being that if you're going to sell the toys, let's make sure we can make the toys
first.
Yeah, and the toys are makeable at a reasonable price point, and then we kind of throw those over the wall to the writers, and that became the way to do it. And then that created again G.I. Joe and Transformers and all the others. So I think that was kind of the crossover that we had. And so you did have those. I mean, Transformers went for however many seasons in animated form.
Yeah. And they did have the toys, and so
yeah.
And there was a comic book. And,
some cool comic books actually for Transformers. They did some neat stuff.
Animated series as well. And so there was that was a successful. Of course, it seems that it leans so much more to the Japanese style of doing the multiple venue marketing and at that age group. Yeah, it seems like that style is very effective.
But yeah, there's all sorts of elements there, and I think one of the reasons superheroes specifically have taken off in the past decade or so is, to be frank, terrorism. We live in a world of vague threats, if you will, or if not vague, then uncertain threats, and so it's nice to retreat into a world of heroes who bash bad guys in very clear and physical ways, and then they all got carted off to Arkham Asylum or whatever, and it's
playing out my fantasies.
Right, exactly. I think
bad
superheroes. Yep, totally.
They get what's coming.
That certainly
justice
helps.
Prevails.
But
yeah. So now the shonen level of marketing, including toys, with seinen, there's still a little bit of marketing of merchandise, but as far as toys, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, different kind of merchandise. For Ghost in the Shell and other seinen titles, you're going to sell more. You may sell more model kits, or not just model kits, but like figurines. You're going to sell more other stuff. So for Witch Hunter Robin, which was more seinen like, they would sell the little pendants that the characters wore, things along those lines, replica props, that kind of stuff you can sell for seinen. Just a different market. But I think also seinen is propped up more by the larger media mix of things like soundtracks and the original the manga novelization, stuff like that. So people aren't buying as much merch, but they're buying other stuff around there.
So when some of these kids grow a little bit older, they can have their own money, they do their own jobs, they buy their own things that they want to get, less of a present from mom and dad, more of a, hey, here's what I'm getting. So that makes sense. Music and
now No Kudasai suggests maybe there's a correlation between Bleach, One Piece, and these soap operas my mom used to watch. Maybe people want something that mirrors their day-to-day activities or school in a very basic way. I think that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of crossover in that idea of this ongoing, continuing soap opera. I mean, if I don't think there's a more accurate description of Naruto than soap opera. And I say that I say that in great love, but there's definitely that element of these constantly shifting relationships,
and everybody's hoping, will it happen? Will it happen?
Exactly. So I think that's definitely true. But and of course, the complexity is these are all different. There's a discussion going on in the chat room about Superman and how much has Superman changed and all these things. And that's one of the things is that American comics are in their own weird place that's quite different from Japanese comics, and they just do things very differently. They have kind of a different business model.
I'm curious about something. So before shonen, what are those kids watching before they reach the age of shonen? Is there a category?
Kodomo. Yeah. So there's the Kodomo genre, which is basically young kids. Kindergarten through early grade school. So you think they're Doraemon, Crayon Shin-chan.
That has some mature themes in it now.
Yeah, well, it's potty humor.
Yeah.
And
the Bart Simpson of
yes,
Japan.
Right, that's right. So true. And So yeah, you've got those shows that are more just kind of light, very episodic story. Case Closed is I mean it's technically shonen. I mean technically shonen, but it's generally marketed to and consumed by closer to the Kodomo market. There's another big one that people talk about a lot and has come over here. I can't remember what it is, but stuff like that. So you have those fun lights, and well, Doraemon, now that it's on Disney XD. Woohoo! So
wow.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So yeah, there's some of those kids shows around. And it should be pointed out that shonen's been around for a very long time. I mean, Astro Boy is shonen.
Astro Boy.
It's definitely aimed at that demographic. And it's why there's this, there's the demographic, and then there's the genre, which is kind of evolved as this specific formula. So it gets a little funky that way. But
it's interesting that it works well here in the US too.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so then there's and part of the discussion in the chat room is this idea that characters in Naruto and One Piece and so forth level up. They improve, but comic book superheroes generally don't do that. Superman has changed, Batman's changed. Superman has gained powers over time, but it's not that kind of treadmill of new powers. You're constantly unlocking new abilities every month or two. It seems in the stories. We just don't do it quite that much. Yeah, right. Yeah, of course, Dragon Ball Z and the Ultimate Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2. We're gonna keep throwing that there. We don't quite have that over here for some reason, and it's odd because I think that's a really fun way of changing things up and keeping the story interesting. But for some reason, we don't do that. Wolverine does snikt and he heals. That's kind of his deal. that's what Wolverine is. And to be fair, that's a credit to the writers. They keep finding interesting stuff to do with those characters.
I wonder if now that the world is so connected and there's spillover between fiction in Japan and the US and the opportunity for people to get this information and entertainment, will we see more writers who are crossing over into different styles?
Oh, sure. I mean, we already do. We've certainly got plenty of, or we've got more Japanese style stories over here. We've got more, Western comics trying to introduce more, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say complex because that sounds wrong, but trying to introduce the more kind of
like more intricate, or
American superheroes have traditionally been kind of very one-sided. They tend to have a very, very specific views on what they should or shouldn't do, whereas anime characters are generally more young and exploring what they should be doing. And so we're seeing a little bit more of that.
It's already decided,
right?
This is my whole right and wrong world view, and that's what I'm finding out.
And in fairness, I mean, that gives you characters like Steve Rogers, Captain America, who has this very firm, set of principles, and so you can bounce lots of things off that to explore that. Shonen is doing something very different by bouncing that off them and then having the person change
and seeing the reactions
and seeing how that actually changes their path. It's
the butterfly flaps its wings suddenly.
Chaos theory, exactly. So, and that's a different way of telling stories. It can be very satisfying to explore somebody's entire philosophy very directly. That's why I like Rurouni Kenshin. That's what's always appealed to me about that, because Kenshin has this very specific moral code, and it's about exploring that moral code as opposed to watching how his code develops. So again, it's kind of different ways of writing stories.
So there's a question here. Do you think Ghost in the Shell live action movie, what do you think of that? And Robotech live action, let's see, may move Western anime consumption away from shonen.
I haven't seen them, so I don't have an opinion on them yet.
I'm kind of curious.
Until they actually exist, I can't really comment on them. They may be there. I mean, Robotech live action has been rumored for, and they've been trying to do it for, gosh, decades now, it seems like. So who knows? Will it move Western anime consumption away from shonen? I doubt it. I think it takes a lot for that to
As
happen.
shonen viewers age, they'll probably grow right into that because it's a natural
Maybe
sort of trend, progression.
Yeah.
But I don't think it'll detract from it. I think you'll like they say, you'll get another crop of young kids coming in who find out about it. And,
yeah.
Oh, this stuff is great. So I think it'll just feed into it. I don't necessarily see it as detracting from it.
Yeah, no, I think those are different markets, as Evan points out. I think you're absolutely right there.
But the overlap now of video games and role-playing games, does that reach into that age group, or is that more?
Good question. Video games, yes. I'd say tabletop games, less so. Well, unless you count, I mean, Pokemon and all those games, they're the card games.
Oh,
those
the
are
card
certainly,
games.
that's certainly true. That's absolutely. So that's definitely a crossover. We haven't been seeing. This would be an interesting thing to explore. I'm not aware of a strong crossover of, say, Pokemon or what's the other big one? I'm forgetting.
Which one? Dragon Ball Z?
No, the other big
the card
Yu-Gi-Oh.
game. Yu-Gi-Oh.
I haven't seen a lot of those gamers cross over into other tabletop gamers, other tabletop games. I don't really see them then moving on to board games or Magic the Gathering or so forth. Maybe they are. I'm just not aware of that. That doesn't seem to be a
big trend,
notable trend.
Not notable, yeah.
So I wonder if that is happening. That would be an interesting thing to maybe
curious.
Just be happening and nobody's
maybe they're
about
just quiet about it.
Yeah,
I like watching that.
But that would be cool. That would make a lot of sense. That's kind of a door into those worlds. I can certainly see folks graduating from Pokemon to Magic the Gathering, for example, if you will. That kind of makes sense. There, and D, you're absolutely right. There's tons of anime based on games. I mean, that is a very popular thing. I think it's about 15% now of anime are video game based. That's the thing. Is Mario shonen? He gets new forms and determined to save Peach from Bowser every day. Yeah, I think that fits.
So.
Totally. And that's
Polly, have a wasabi pea.
There we are.
They're delicious.
Yeah, video games are a natural crossover because you have, you have characters, you have a world, you have a company very anxious to advertise its product, and so you can make that anime very, much more easily than you can an original property or something else. That's work to do. So it's a little bit easier, but on the other hand, you have freedom to tell whatever story you want to with those characters. You don't have to follow the video game plot exactly. So it's nice, isn't it? As we saw from the Super Mario Brothers movie, it didn't really follow the plot of the video game very closely. Yeah. Poor Bob Hoskins. So what about the harem and ecchi shonen formula that Rumiko Takahashi established? That's an interesting point. That really hasn't that kind of died out, more or less.
Yeah.
Ranma and Half, Inuyasha, Urusei Yatsura.
I kind of like those.
I love them.
That hit that spot in my inner my inner shonen. Yeah, I'd like to see some more of those. I don't know why those died out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that thing, and I think part of it is that I think shonen has tended to become so mainstream. I wonder if it's because of the internationalization of anime, maybe that because it's shown in so many countries around the world now. I wonder if that more ecchi material is a little harder to sell.
Getting a little bit more sensitive to the different cultural,
right, and
sort of vibes.
I would argue that around the world, violence is easier to sell than sexuality. Some countries are more okay with the nudity and so forth. But I would say, generally speaking, people don't get as upset over people punching each other and bloody nostrils and things than they are over the occasional side boob.
Which seems kind of crazy.
It's odd, but that's well. I
mean, everybody's got a body.
To be fair,
everybody got somebody.
Sexual topics dealing with children is a sensitive
That's something I can
thing.
see
So
being
it's,
very,
it is targeted at, tweens and preteens.
Not
often,
that they
so,
don't think about it, but we don't want to encourage them to think about it more than they ordinarily think about it.
You got to be careful about, how much you're kind of throwing in their face, if you will.
But that begs the question, should we be showing them as much violence? Would there be less violence?
That's the thing.
Maybe heroes who are committed to not killing somebody, or who work a very creative solution to a very complicated problem that saves more lives than it hurts.
Right.
A lot of heroes are like that. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, and obviously, Goku doesn't want to fight. He fights only when he has to, and otherwise he'd rather be a farmer. Which is really interesting when you think about it. I mean, compare that to most superheroes. That ain't Batman. We have very different sort of views on things. It's kind of hard to imagine, Wolverine as a normal person, driving a truck somewhere or something.
It's so much of his own character to be his own person. He's got his own way. Very, very American in that sort of self driven.
Yeah.
Not to the collective, to myself. The independence.
It's ironic because he's Canadian,
character. Oh, yeah, that's right. What North American?
Yeah. Although I think technically,
Americans. Well, that includes South America too, right?
True. Although I've heard technically he was born in America, but he was raised in Canada, something like that line. I don't know. I don't follow X-Men that closely. Blackjack. That's a great example of a positive hero. He's a surgeon.
Yeah,
he's looking to help people and solve that. But is initial D shonen? Yep, definitely. Initial D shonen. It has teenage protagonists, but it follows more the shonen formula. It's certainly not aimed very closely at adults. I'd put that on the fence, though. I mean, you could argue it's more seinen than a shonen series, but it's
Hohenheim of light. I'm surprised. I thought Brotherhood was going to be darker. I thought that was. I haven't seen Brotherhood yet, so I've watched the full Metal Alchemist first series, but spoilers.
Yeah. I don't watch Angry Beavers. Good role models there. Exactly.
Badgers. Sorry.
A regular show. A bunch of
regular show
running around.
Regular shows fun.
That's great.
Adventure Time.
Regular show has Mark Hamill in it.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. The gorilla in a regular show. That's Mark Hamill.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It's a great role there. What is he say? Oh yeah, that is that low gravelly voice, I believe. Wonderful. Must tear his throat to pieces.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point, Liquidus. We start this conversation and folks are immediately talking about shonen. I don't need to explain what shonen is. I did, but the chat room just jumped right into the topic. It says a lot that if there's one genre you know of in anime, it's probably shonen.
Yes. I learned about that before everything else.
Right. Exactly.
There's these things called
Yeah, totally. So yeah. Case Closed has a very good reason to be this long. It's popular. People are still buying Case Closed stuff like crazy. You'd be surprised. There's when I was in Japan, there's I walked by a travel agency that was offering Case Closed tours. Basically they had Case Closed in the window, and they said, okay, in this episode he travels to Amsterdam. Here's an Amsterdam thing, and it's just kind of, and it wasn't necessarily going to
cute.
The points in the show. Those exact locations, but it was
these are the
tie-in. Yeah, that's a neat idea to say. You've watched this. But yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of different reasons I think why shonen is popular. I think we've covered a good number of things here. It's and we keep coming back to this thing on Brain Swap. It is complicated. There's lots of reasons for things.
Now, I'm curious, what is the female counterpart to shonen?
Technically shoujo. So that's the demographic, girls, tween and young teen. So magical girl shows are almost always shoujo, Sailor Moon and the like.
Shoujo.
So yeah, I would definitely go in that. But again, you'll have girls watching shonen and boys watching shoujo. That is the reality. But shoujo tends to be a very different sort of genre approach. Shoujo series are not as much about fighting, although magical girls can be, but it's a different kind of fighting. It's, I would say, conflict rather than fighting specifically. They're using magical spells and things to defeat their opponents usually, instead of kicking and fighting, unless it's precure. So No Kudasai brings up that sense of normality shonen often falls back into after a while, that kind of mirrors the life of a school child. It's a good point. Think of Naruto, and you have these ninjas in training, and then suddenly they take a written exam for being a ninja. Okay. And you're complete with desks in the whole 9 yards. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right that tends to happen. And even in shows like Dragon Ball Z, there's this strong sense of the normal family life and raising kids and all that stuff. That's certainly true. And again, I think it gets back to audience. If you're aiming this at 12-year-olds, that's their life too.
And airing time is very important, as we see here. I love this term, the death slot on Adult Swim. There are certain times where you can have the greatest show, but if you put it in a bad time, it's harder for people to gather and build an audience. Yeah, everybody can watch non-linear time, non-appointment watching. But if it's on, it's on. You may have it playing in the background, and everybody's going to kind of gravitate to it. And so getting a good time slot can be really important for building momentum, and then people can watch it. I
think I mentioned this before when Toonami showed their week of mecha, and they did 2 different mecha series every day for a week, and it just bombed, and nobody watched it. And I think part of it, and I think it wasn't exactly that, but it was throwing random episodes of mecha series at people at 5 p.m. Just nobody had the right context for it. Nobody knew what was going on. It was interrupting other shows. And so I think it couldn't build that momentum you were talking about.
I wonder if people confuse mecha with something to do with religion. Not that mecha. It's a different mecha.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mechanical, mechanized.
Mecha is my religion. What you're talking about.
Gundam.
And yeah, a lot of folks don't like shonen series because they do go on so long, and it's hard to get into them and follow them. Much like a lot of people don't get into American comics because there are all these plot lines and backstory things to understand about who is this character they're referencing. That can be kind of a barrier. It is certainly true. AS729 is asks, do I like the Case Closed movie? There are quite a few of Case Closed movies. I've only seen one. I like that a lot, and that was Detective Conan versus Lupin III.
Oh, wow.
That was definitely a lot of fun. Yes. It's sort of a crossover there. They meet and have a little bit of an adventure.
I dig crossovers. That sounds like it would be fun to watch.
That was cool. And they do a good job of, how to say this without spoilers.
How they met.
Their personalities are maintained, right? It's not, oh, hi, let's have an adventure together, right? The characters have their own views on things. So the gears
did mesh pretty well.
Yeah, they absolutely. It's pretty cool. Some people didn't like it, but I thought it was fun. And obviously, you've got to understand it as a crossover. So the Conan fans are like, why was there so much Lupin? And Lupin fans, why was there so much Conan? It's like, well, you've got to make that work.
Be happy you got it.
Yeah, exactly. Dead Man Wonderland, I would say that's shonen. Again, it's aimed at an older audience, but that falls pretty squarely in the shonen.
How many seasons was that?
Dead Man, I think just one.
Just one?
Maybe
left
two.
Me going.
Yeah. I know the manga went on for a while.
That
so maybe one of those things where they just kind of said, okay, we'll do as much as we can. There may have been a second season of Dead Man Wonderland now that I think about it. I'm not sure.
That had me going for a little while. Okay, when's the next episode? When's the next episode?
A lot of folks like that one.
Yeah,
definitely. Oh, Slayers. Yeah.
Gotta see that.
Fun one. But yeah, so all right. Thank you all very much for joining us this week. We covered a lot of topics. Plenty more stuff to talk about, obviously, on Shonen, but we can't be here all night, sadly. I will join us next week where we're going to be talking about something that's a little unusual. I think it's going to be a fun one. We're going to discuss the question of the influence of Shinto in anime, the Shinto religion, which is a traditional religion in Japan. Feel free to Google that and learn more about Shinto for next time. We'll be mentioning some anime that includes a lot of Shinto in it, and some stuff that doesn't, but maybe influenced by Shinto. So that is the plan for next week. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
Peace and love.
Oh,
peace and love.
Love, and yes. All right, so we have to do it. You know, it's the Trigun thing, right? Love and peace. There we go. All right. Thanks all very much. See you next time.
See ya.